A new game that you've released through Achille Interactive is Endeavor OTC. And as I was looking at Endeavor OTC, I was like, OTC, I wonder what OTC means. And then I scroll down and I see Endeavor RX. And so there are two versions of this game. One is prescribable and one is over the counter. So maybe first, what is Endeavor? What is the game? Why is there an over the counter and a prescription version?
This is such a juicy conversation. This is the most relevant to today, this conversation. I mean, the rest has been building the framework for it. Let me just start by
Distractibility.
Exactly. Let me turn off my ringer. It's amazing that it hasn't bothered me before this. Let's just talk a little bit about Endeavor. So this is a long story that I'm going to tell very quickly.
You can tell it long if you want to.
I will tell it as quick as I can, but it won't be as short as I would like it to be. But Endeavor, the game, which is Achilles' product that's out in the real world, began as a game called Neuroracer. In my lab 15 years ago, 2008, is when I started working on it. Neuroracer was my first closed loop video game that I ever built. I did it with friends that worked at LucasArts. And this was my very first idea of a closed loop intervention to improve attention abilities. And my target population were healthy older adults, because that's where most of my research was. That's where I have so many publications showing that older adults have declining attention abilities and it impairs their lives. So that was my target. I did actually some drug trials using Aricept, the drug that we used to treat Alzheimer's disease, with modest effects. I mean, it yielded a publication, but it certainly wasn't anything that I would run out and tell people to use for their attention abilities as they got older. So this is sort of the very real story that is a nice accompaniment to the more abstract story that I already shared with you, which was more my inspiration. This is what I tried to do. Let's build a closed loop video game to improve attention abilities in older adults. That was my goal. That was basically the introduction to numerous grants that I wrote and got rejected to accomplish this. Finally getting funding in 2009 by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation after the NIH rejected it multiple times. And what we built was a game called Neuroracer. And this game was a closed loop game. It was a driving game that challenged older adults to focus on a selective discrimination task of identifying a certain sign and ignoring other signs, at the same time navigating a car along a road, like a sort of sensory motor tracking task. And you had to do them at the same time. And you only leveled up in the game. You only got the rewards that you were advancing if they both got better. That was like a very important ingredient of this that we did not have at the beginning. And the hypothesis was that because networks, prefrontal cortical networks in your brain that are engaged when you multitask and when you resist distraction, overlap and are related to networks that you engage when you're sustaining attention in a single task, even with your eyes closed, like the very opposite in what feels like an opposite type of attention deployment, that there are similar networks involved. My hypothesis was that if we could push you in this domain to hold your attention, to switch your attention, to resist distraction, all in a closed loop at the highest level we can do, that I could imagine working with like designers from LucasArts, like what could we do to push this as if we're training for an Olympic attention, event? What would happen to attention abilities that were very different than gameplay? Sustaining your attention in a really boring task, one thing at a time, no rewards, no colors, no lights, none of that. And my hypothesis was that it would transfer, that if you could build this under this condition, you would see the benefits under this condition. And that is what we found. That paper was published in Nature. It was the cover of Nature in 2003. This is actually 2013. So this is the 10-year anniversary of that. It was September of 2003, September 5th. Very important day in my life. Cover of Nature, maybe that comes along once in a scientist's life. And that's what we found. We found that this game, this was 5 years after starting it. So there's a whole bunch of public findings in there that I won't spend too much time on now. But basically, we recorded neural activity before and after to show the mechanism. We showed the benefits. We showed some sustained benefits 6 months later. And what this was not a license to now prescribe this. I had never told any other older adult to play Neuroracer. It wasn't even available on any existing operating system anymore. It was really a prototype and a signal that there was something here, that we could build a unique type of video game, a closed loop video game. We could do a very careful, there were 3 groups in this, 2 control groups. We could do a very careful research study with neural outcomes, show a transfer of benefits, show neurological mechanism of action, and say, there's something here. We did that. One of the biggest criticisms, which is a funny scientific criticism, was that this hasn't been replicated, which of course is true. It was the first paper. It's now been replicated over a dozen times in different populations with different versions of the game. So I'm very happy a decade later of what we have done, given, especially given the replication crisis that science faces. And so Neuroracer became Endeavor. So now I'm going to jump 15 years ahead. A company was started, Achille. I am a co-founder of Achille. So disclosure here, I'm a founder. I have founder equity. I started this company. I never had an executive position in Achille. I've been a board member. I'm a science advisor. I am the inventor of the original technology, but I have 100% position at UCSF as a professor. But that was basically a transfer from UCSF. Matter of fact, UCSF owns the patent behind Neuroracer, which is the methodology of the closed loop game. Achille built out a way better game, but we preserved the underlying engine of the game that's described in the patent. That is the exact same as Neuroracer. That is what Endeavor is. Endeavor's had over 30 clinical trials in many populations, all showing improvements in sustained attention outside of the game, from major depressive disorder to children with ADHD to lupus to multiple sclerosis, on and on, all converging on the same finding, agnostic to the population that's engaging in it, right? It has nothing to do with the underlying pathological conditions of them. It's just that it strengthens attention abilities. This game then went through, for the first time ever, a de novo medical device approval process at the FDA, and it was approved after 2 years, looking at both efficacy and side effects, which are very low, as you might imagine. And the game was approved in 2020 as a Class 2 medical device therapeutic option to treat children, 8 to 12-year-olds with ADHD. And so with that, Endeavor RX was born, the first ever video game approved by the FDA for any medical condition, the first ever digital treatment for children of any sort approved by the FDA. And we began moving this into the world as a prescription-only treatment for ADHD in children through their doctors. And that is Endeavor RX. So I'll pause there just to make sure I haven't monologued too long. And I could tell you about Endeavor OTC, which is like fascinating, but that's sort of the 15-year journey from an idea all the way through a treatment that's out in the world that is an alternative to things like Adderall, or maybe not an alternative, can be used in conjunction.
Okay. That's awesome. I have tons of questions, but I think that I should let you finish and talk about Endeavor OTC first, and then I'll jump back in. Yeah.
The short story is that it worked. Endeavor RX is working. People prescribe it in every state in this country. There are, over 10,000, probably over 15,000 prescriptions written by doctors for kids. We have tons of data that we're generating, tons of anecdotes, parents crying about seeing, the outcomes. Does it work for everyone? No, of course not. But it's working. Every month we have more prescriptions, which is impressive. It's a completely new medical category. It had a de novo pathway. I'm very proud of it, but I could tell you it is not working fast enough from a business perspective. And the main reason why, there are 2 reasons why. One, the physician gatekeeper is really challenging, right? Because if a clinical psychologist in a elementary school sees a kid that has an ADHD diagnosis, they have to refer them to a physician to get a prescription. So, and, some physicians have been doing, Adderall treatment for, or Ritalin treatment for 40 years. They're not like, what, a video game as a treatment? So there is a hurdle to overcome that limits the scaling that needs to occur for any company to be successful. And it's largely not reimbursable by insurance, which is really sort of the valley of death for many companies if you're not very big companies. So there is very frequently the data exists for any medical device. It's not specific for digital therapeutics between when you get regulatory approval and when you get insurance reimbursement. It could be on average 6 years. And during that time, there's a whole host of people that don't have the money to pay for prescription medicine. Prescription medicines have to be much more expensive than other things, largely because the prescription process itself is so expensive. There are so many middlemen along the way. This was all education to me. And so there's only so low you can have for prescription medicine before your company's just basically giving it away. And what we started doing was essentially like giving away half of our treatment for people in need that didn't have money. And you just can't run a business like that. You can't successfully ever become profitable. And in these times, you can't raise money anymore. And so we were pretty confident that if we continued with EndeavorRx as a prescription only model, we would go bankrupt. There is one other company that had a prescription digital therapeutic before Achilles. It was not a video game. It was a cognitive behavioral therapy. That company is called Therapeutics, and they went bankrupt as a prescription digital therapeutic, unable to accomplish this because of lack of reimbursement. And we did not want that to happen to us. And so we pivoted. We just now publicly announced this, which allows me to talk about this. I didn't mention, but Achilles is now a public company. We went through an IPO a little over a year ago. And so we have announced a pivot away from prescription digital therapeutics as Achilles focus to over-the-counter. So everyone probably has heard of over-the-counter. That's why we use Endeavor OTC. It distinguishes those products. Endeavor OTC is available for adults on the App Store and now through Android without a prescription. You don't have to tell your doctor about it. You can download it. It's still in an FDA pathway right now. There was an emergency digital treatment pathway initiated during COVID that we've managed to use to keep the OTC there. We are now applying through the FDA for OTC designation. They're actually not the same. You need both RX and OTC as separate approvals. But we're excited about having a digital treatment that has all the rigor and validation that we saw in our RX product, but taking the doctor and the insurance companies out of the loop. Because now we could charge a lot less, that we don't have prescription processing in there. And now we also go directly to our customers, which are patients in need of all ages, without having to go through a doctor. So that's what Endeavor OTC is.
Okay, great. Now I have a lot of questions. I actually want to go back to NeuroRacer, just start from the beginning. But before we go to NeuroRacer, are the OTC and RX versions of Endeavor the same video game, or did you have to make changes for an OTC product? Just because I know, like, if you get prescription strength Tylenol, it's going to be stronger. It's going to be a different product.
Yeah, so they are the same. They are the same engine. There are differences with the prescription version, largely related to how it interfaces with the patient and their doctor and their parent and what other medics. So it's more of a full treatment program as you would expect for an RX. So like it's asking what drugs are you taking? Are you on Adderall? And it connects all of the caregivers and stakeholders in that process. Endeavor OTC is free from that. It is just the active ingredient delivered to you. There are many examples of prescription and OTC products that are exactly the same. I have a friend that recently was looking for a birth control pill, and they were like, well, you can get the OTC or the prescription. Same thing. Prescription comes with your doctor's awareness. It may get insurance reimbursement. You get type of instructions, but the treatment's the same. And so that exists. And so we would fall more into that category. And so this is a new area for us. I don't think there's another example of a digital therapeutic that is OTC. So we're like in uncharted territory, figuring out how to get our treatment that we are confident works to people in need in a way that's accessible to them and in a way that makes our company sustainable so that we could keep doing this and create new treatments.
So, okay, starting back with NeuroRacer, when I was reading about it, I saw that it was geared toward improving cognitive control. Is that different from attentiveness?
No, Well, yeah. So cognitive control is sort of a bit of an umbrella term. Like people use executive function. Cognitive control, how I define it, is essentially different aspects of attention. So selective attention, working memory, task switching, all of that would fit into the cognitive control umbrella. And we actually found in our Nature paper benefits in sustained attention, but also working memory. These are very related concepts. So that's why there is an umbrella term that brings them together so nicely. There are common neural networks involved, which is why we see benefits across domains. And that they are, transfer is not a magic trick. Like there has to be some mechanistic bridge between them in order for it to happen. And so that paper, and even the title of that paper, was directed at cognitive control because we looked at multiple different outcomes of cognitive control and saw benefits beyond classic sustained attention, which is we did find, but also in terms of working memory, which is holding information in mind for short periods of time, which is another type of attention.
Mm-hmm. How does working memory, I was going to ask about working memory, how does it fit into a racing game?
It doesn't, which is why it's such awesome transfer. There are very little working memory demands in NeuroRacer or in Endeavor for that matter, which is why the transfer to better working memory for faces in older adults was such a cool outcome. You have to remember like that it's a green circle you're responding to, but I don't think anyone forgets that. That's a pretty low working memory demand. So like when a green pentagon pops up, you have trouble suppressing it because it looks similar, but not because you think green pentagon is your target. So the fact that you could play a game that has almost no working memory demand and then get better working memory is like another really important example of transfer. And so that's why when people in the field are like, there's no such thing as transfer. These are not plastic. I'm like, well, how do you explain that? Right? Like that to me and we've replicated those type of findings. So that's not trained specifically by the game. That is an outcome of the benefits of you get by having a better attentional deployment system. You get to deploy it in different ways.
And you just mentioned again, replicated across population. So it's agnostic to conditions. You mentioned ADHD. It's also agnostic to age.
Seems to be true.
Okay, that's so cool. And just before I go on, I mean, this must feel so great given that your goal was always to make meaningful intervention. So congratulations. It's not every day there's a new class of medicine.
Thank you. It's it's great. I forget the joy sometimes because I'm so focused on actually successfully delivering it now that I just get caught up in the fact that insurance doesn't reimburse for it, but kids are in need and we know that there's no side effects and the FDA approved it. It's like, why would you not reimburse for it? It's like, it's mind boggling to me and depressing. And so we need to have a new business plan. We need to, we're constantly trying to figure out how to make this work, even though it seems to be effective and people need it. And so I forget sometimes to celebrate the fact that as a scientist, I've been able to do something like this, which is so hard to do. But I am super happy, and it's not just me. I mean, I work with hundreds of people on this to get here, and we're super proud that we have something that traveled from an idea all the way into a kid's hands that gives them so much satisfaction. And one of the amazing joys that I have is, as a scientist, we look at p values and effect sizes, and if they're all in alignment, we get a publication. We're like, yeah, that's great. I mean, if you're really, really fortunate, it's in a journal like Nature, and that's incredibly gratifying. But I can say that hearing firsthand a 14-year-old and their mom tell me about how this has affected their life when everything else has failed is just tear-inducing, right? That is another level of reward. It's not a p-value. It's a N of one story, but it's really been incredibly meaningful to me to be able to have that as part of my life, is that there are people that are actually being helped that can talk about it really eloquently.